You hear me? Oh, shit. Sorry. There's a little button on the back of my earphones. You must push this little button. I'm so very sorry. Are you going to read something, or will we be discussing how corrupt SCOTUS is? We could definitely. I was going to read a chapter of the Democracy Awakening. Um, I am delighted to talk about how corrupt SCOTUS is. Also, that reminds me, because I scheduled something for tomorrow, don't go. It'd be interesting, which was the report about foreign influence in the Trump administration. But I wonder if it would be interesting to talk about SCOTUS. And you know what I could do? I could curate some clips about different analysis. Let me see if I can do that. I'm curious to see if I have the intestinal fortitude to do that. Hold on. I want to make this jungle scene that I have is freaking gorgeous. I'm dying. It's so beautiful. I don't want to be there because I think the bugs would be really huge. So I don't really want to be like right there. Let me see what it actually I don't know what it actually sounds like. Hold on. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's kind of nice. Is that too much? Is that too much over my voice or under my voice? I hope not. I hope it's good. How is everyone? I missed you. You know, I intended to read a chapter last night, and then uh, some folks just really wanted to do a space and just kind of like, you know, talk and I don't know. So it seemed like a good evening for a space. Hi, Oomph. Oh, good. Okay, great. Hi, Cash App. How's the baby? How's the mama? Also. So uh, I can't remember what I was going to say. Oh, I can't remember what I was going to say. It's okay. It'll come back to me. We're all pretty shitty. Thanks for asking. I'm sorry, don't go. How are you, my darling friend? I definitely want to know how you are. Yeah, it's a pretty shitty decision to I was especially moved by um Judge Ludwig's take. I'm good. I'm good. Don't go so sarcastic. I'm sorry I didn't ask you how you were. Let's see. Oh, yeah. I when Judge Ludwig is sad about something like that, I that really kind of struck me that this was, more games being played basically, and I understand intellectually the overwhelming need for some people to feel like they have, that they control it all. I really do understand it intellectually. I don't feel like I could maintain that. I mean, I can be, you know, materialistic and shallow just like anyone else. But I can't, I know, because I've been faced, as a lot of us have, with decisions to make, and it's actually not that hard to choose integrity. Yeah, that's it, don't go. It's a worse decision than if SCOTUS had ruled in favor. Well, is it though? I don't know. Is that true? No, that's not true. That would have been worse. You know what I think? Okay, let's look at the bright side of this for a second. Let me know if that Jungle is too loud. Cue jungle. No. Um, what I think is, oh, that's interesting. I would be interested. We should do a space on it. Maybe that's what we should do. Don't go is a space on the SCOTUS stuff. We can talk about it tomorrow too. I'd be interested. Um, but the oh shit, dang it! Now I forgot what I was gonna say. It's okay. It'll come back to me. It's not important. It's really not. Anyway, wow, look at that. I just think this jungle picture is so gorgeous. I really love it. I really do. Um, yeah. Well, I think, yeah, so I think integrity, right? Yeah. So I just don't feel like I could like slow down my job in order to benefit. Oh, really? There's a space tonight about the decision. Yeah, because it took them 2 weeks to make the decision. Who's in the space? See, now you got me all curious. God dang it. Don't go. You're a troublemaker. Who's, who's, shit. I can't, Samira. Oh, here we go. I just want to see who's doing it. Oops. Who's hosting it? I don't know who those people are. Well, some of those, yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. Um, yeah, I'd rather kind of, it'd be interesting to go through some of the analysis and just, that is helpful for me to form, you know, kind of an outlook. They haven't scheduled the exact date for the oral arguments, but that'll be soon. It'll be the week of April 22nd, I guess. So, oh, I just feel like there's a potential every day to have something. Well, actually, I guess that's just life. But a little bit of a roller coaster these days for everybody. I had a really good drive down to Orange County yesterday. It is like a 2-hour drive each way, but it takes you through because it avoids the freeway. So the route always takes me through these places I've talked about before in California where it's like short rolling hills. And it's definitely like earthquake fault kind of land formation. But it is just like heaven on earth to me. Little tiny valleys with little tiny ranches just spotted here and there. And I think I've said, well, I know I've said this before, but I would just love to take a little tiny house and just plunk it on top of one of those hills. I wonder what you could see. I wonder how far you could see. Because they're not that tall. They're actually pretty small. Do you kind of expect a jaguar to come out of that jungle bush? Sorry, my mind's a little all over the place. Anyway, so it was a really beautiful drive, and because, I'm driving and I had the news on in the background, so I kept up with the hearing in Georgia mostly. And snakes, yeah. Definitely snakes and big spiders. I don't like big spiders. Um, and I really, to some degree, when you're that isolated on a trip, it's both wonderful and kind of disassociating. No, I don't know if that's the right word. Where you kind of like lose contact with your traditional daily world, I guess, which I guess for me is more like social media kind of stuff, or includes a lot of social media. And so for yesterday, there was a little bit of like fear of missing out, but there was also just like a return to a different headspace and letting go. And I guess for the first time in a while, I just felt like it was okay to let go of some stuff. So that was interesting. So yeah, so tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock Pacific, noon Eastern, etc. I want to read the report that the House Oversight Committee Democrats prepared and released in January of this year. And it goes country by country and apparently outlines the entanglements of the Trump administration to each of those countries. So it looks like it might be an interesting report, and Jamie Raskin was really pleading with people to read it and not forget and not gloss over it, which I thought was interesting. So I said, heck, let's do it. I do think there might be a Georgia hearing tomorrow. I don't know if it's in camera or whatever, or ex parte. I don't know. Which one is it? Which one is it? But nonetheless, neither here nor there. I think there might be something, so clearly, if that's the case, I'll check in the morning and make the necessary adjustments. Um, Thanks to everyone who's been pumping up the Democracy Dino stuff. That's really great. It's very encouraging. I really appreciate it. It's nice to have that. People in your corner. Yeah, I'll have to figure out what's next. What's next for Dino? I got 20. No, I got 40 new subscribers on YouTube, which was awesome. And I think I got like 22 new followers after people saw the dino stuff, which is really super cool. I was really happy. And everyone was very supportive. So I really appreciated that. And it also reminded me I might need to get myself a new dino suit. That poor suit's really had been put through the ringer. I don't treat it very well. Tail's kind of starting to tear, but those are easy to buy. Super, super affordable dinosaurs, thankfully. So, Let's see. Oh, and then we had a space yesterday, and again, like I said, it was really just like let's just let our hair down space. And I realize, a lot of people were like, or Sun Tzu's, I don't like calling him that because that's not his name, and he's a white dude from Florida. So I call him Ben, which is his name. And I realize people might have thought I was being mean to Ben, but Ben and I go back, and I've had a long time to think about what I want to say to him. So I realize it was kind of mean, but at the same time, I have boundaries for a reason, and other people do too. So if Ben doesn't want to be there, he doesn't have to be there, but he likes being part of the show. So who am I not to oblige? I mean, if you're stepping up to be the heckler, what stand up comedian isn't going to take that opportunity to address a heckler, which Ben very much is? But no, I don't hate him. I don't wish him any ill will. I don't even know who he is, but his worldview is problematic. And his actions in furtherance of that worldview are problematic. And when given the opportunity, he does not give me an opportunity to speak in his world. So, anyway, lots of reasons. But I'm sure he'll get over it. I think he's probably well over it by now. And I'm sure there'll be another day when we can talk. But it doesn't really matter to me, frankly. I don't care to convince him of anything. I said what I needed to say for my own peace of mind. I just plant the seed, and sometimes the seed just withers or gets eaten by a bird. Sometimes that happens. But it was, it was cathartic, and it was sometimes helpful to verbalize some of those things. But nonetheless, here we are. I know. Well, actually, it was, well, and I'm guilty of that. But I think there's also one person in particular that just really does not want to share a stage with him, and I understand her reasons for that. Um, so it's fine. If I do, I think the one thing that impacted it was the lateness of the hour, and I think certainly Jim wisely knew that if I let him up there, that it would be kind of one of those silly little back and forths. So he's right. They're right. It probably would have been. So, yeah, poor Ben. But I think certainly him and Jim have a long-term relationship. Friendly, adversarial. I don't know. What do you call that? Frenemies? I don't know. They're currently take opportunities to jab at each other. I don't know. It happens. I've had people like that. Usually they block me pretty fast. You know, like Joey Bags blocked me because I called him Joey Bags. But it really works. Anyway, no, you're right. It wasn't my finest moment, but it felt good. And some days it's okay to feel good. And I don't know. I'm not too bothered by it. Um, But yeah, I don't know. Those are interesting. I have a feeling we'll end up having the data conversation, but I don't think he has any actual data because he didn't name the person whose data he follows. He just talked about the Georgia videotape, which was really quite thoroughly debunked early on pretty easily. And that's the whole Ruby Freeman story, and Rudy already admitted. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway. So yeah. Good times. No. Over the years of yeah, well, actually has been years of doing the spaces. There's always been these kind of like characters that come out of the woodwork, like Warrior. There was another couple early on, and they were provocateurs and right wing mostly, actually, all right wing. And it was almost like like the usual kind of, well, I'm gonna punch into work now, and I'm gonna argue with, you know, Gal Suburban for a while, and try and convince him that Seb Gorka is a good person or something. So it's usually, I'm used to kind of like interactions like that are actually more theater, frankly. But I felt like sometimes you get to use theater for good. And I will say this because I'm not a complete bitch. If I ever sensed that someone like Ben was feeling brutally attacked, I would have stopped. And that the case simply is that this kind of back and forth is the dysfunctional relationship of maggots and non-maggots in this instance. But anyway, no. I hope Ben gets a chance to tell me what's what. Bring it on. I don't care at this point. Everybody's got an opinion, but nobody has any facts. I just really like this jungle, but I am going to have to turn it down a bit so I can read because it might be too much. So we'll turn it down quite a bit. Alrighty, so we are on chapter 8 of Democracy Awakening, and this book contains some descriptions of traumatic or painful historical events. So I do caution listeners to understand there may be content that is disturbing or uncomfortable. And I'll do my best to not highlight painful words or other things that aren't necessary to the telling of the story. I encourage you to buy the book on your own to support the author. And if you do feel like you want to make any kind of donation, I really hope that you'll just make that to a charity that you love and not to me. This is definitely something that I like to do because I want to read these books, and I will only do it if I am reading them to someone else. Because I just am not that avid a reader, although I aspire to be. So this is really a labor of love. So I'm going to begin with Chapter 8 of Democracy Awakening by Professor Heather Cox Richardson, a history professor. I want to say she's at Yale maybe she's not. Forgive me. No, Boston. BU. She's at Boston University. Thank you. Okay, now I remember. All right, I'll begin. What I need you to do is to forget about today. Wednesday is over. The hump has passed. It is time for Thursday. Which I know is a special day for a lot of people, and I always wish them the best Thursdays. But today is done, so you can put it away. I used to go to martial arts, and I'm sure this is a common martial arts thing for people to say, but the sensei, the head of the dojo, was very charismatic. Actually, I have a really odd story about him, but nonetheless, I won't go into that now. But this very charismatic sensei would always say, before you enter the dojo, you remove your shoes and set them in a special place that is for your shoes. And he always told us to envision taking our day and putting our day in those shoes, so that when we entered the dojo, we were leaving that behind and just focusing on what was happening in the moment. And for all his faults, and there were many, that was a really wonderful visualization, I thought, and really helpful sometimes. So I encourage you to take your Wednesday and put it somewhere safe. But you don't have to look at it anymore. And you can just be in the moment. Take a very deep breath and sink back into your seat. Chapter 8. Skewing the System. There was a key psychological advantage to the rhetoric that turned Democrats into the enemy. It put Democrats on defense, forcing them to explain themselves instead of counter their opponents. This made it easier for the Republican Party, captured now by the movement conservatives, to skew the nation's political system in their favor. Reagan's people had to reckon with the reality that Americans liked the liberal consensus, and Republicans could not win control of Congress to put their vision into place. Disillusioned when voters refused to embrace the ideology that seemed so fundamental to them, they began to weaken the actual mechanics of democracy. In 1986, concerned that voters in the future might overturn their tax cuts, Republicans took a more proactive approach to mobilizing their evangelical support. Chamber of Commerce economist Grover Norquist formally brought together Nixon's alliance of big business, evangelicals, and social conservatives into Americans for Tax Reform. Quote, traditional Republican business groups can provide the resources, but these groups can provide the votes, he said. While the votes he was marshaling were for tax cuts and pro-business legislation, Republicans usually defended those measures in terms of family values. Activist Phyllis Schlafly, for example, protested vehemently against tax deductions for poor families because such a benefit was, quote, just an idea of liberal bureaucrats who wanted to redistribute the wealth. Deductions were anti-growth and therefore anti-family by definition. Republicans also started talking of ballot integrity measures that party operatives privately hoped would knock black voters off the rolls. When Americans elected a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, to the White House in 1992, Republicans' sense of mission escalated. After Democrats made it easier to register to vote by passing the so-called Motor Voter Act in 1993, permitting voters to register at certain state offices, Republicans accused them of turning to illegal, usually immigrant, voters. Republican candidates who lost in the 1994 midterm elections began to claim that Democrats had won only through voter fraud. In 1996, Republicans in both the House and the Senate launched year-long investigations into what they insisted were problematic elections, one in Louisiana and one in California. Ultimately, they turned up nothing, but keeping the cases in front of the media for a year helped convince Americans that Democratic voter fraud was a serious issue. The House began to talk of passing a voter identification law, but the Florida legislature beat them to it. After a corrupt 1997 Miami mayoral race between a Republican and an independent, the Florida legislature passed a law that purged up to 100,000 black voters, presumed to be Democrats, from the system. This purge paid off in 2000 when Democratic presidential candidate Albert Gore Jr., running against Republican George W. Bush, won the popular vote by more than 500,000 votes, but was 4 votes short of a win in the Electoral College. The contest came down to Florida, where a confusing ballot siphoned off to far-right Reform Party candidate Pat Buchanan about 10,000 votes meant for Gore. A hand recount had reduced Bush's lead from 1,784 to 537 when Republican operatives, with the approval of Bush advisor and longtime Republican establishment figure James Baker, and including Roger Stone, attacked the recount venue in Miami-Dade County to stop the recount. As the Brooks Brothers riot made clear, Republicans now saw politics as a street fight for victory. Black voters who had been kept from the polls recognized what was happening was a Jim Crow confrontation, but Democratic leaders tried to preserve the calm reason of the democratic system. They lost. The Supreme Court, led by 5 Republican-appointed justices and headed by Chief Justice William Rehnquist, who started in politics by questioning black voters at Arizona polling sites in the 1960s, stepped in to decide the winner. Later, after widespread reports of irregularities, an investigation by the United States Commission on Civil Rights revealed an extraordinarily high and inexcusable level of disenfranchisement, primarily of Democratic African American voters. Republicans worked to reduce voting under cover of voter fraud, and then taking to the streets to sway the courts by creating chaos had given them the White House. The country was shifting away from democracy in other ways, too. In February 1986, Samuel Alito, a 35-year-old lawyer for the Office of Legal Counsel in the Department of Justice, offered up a plan to revise the lawmaking power the Constitution gave to Congress, giving the president more authority. He claimed that the president should not simply sign or veto a law passed by Congress, but shape the law as he wished. Alito proposed the use of signing statements to give the president the power to interpret the laws. He recognized that this idea would be controversial, so he proposed beginning by quietly establishing a precedent that would convince the courts that presidential signing statements are valuable interpretive tools. He acknowledged that Congress would not welcome this new type of signing statement because it would increase the power of the president relative to Congress and would give the president the last word on interpretation of laws. That's a terrible idea. That's my commentary. That sounds like Project 2025. The next year, on September 29, 1987, Reagan attached a signing statement to a debt bill, declaring his right to interpret it as he wished, saying the president could not be forced, quote, to follow the orders of a subordinate. While few people paid attention to it, this statement was a shot across the bow of American democracy. It advanced the theory of the unitary executive, which says that because the president is the head of one of the 3 unique branches of government, any oversight of that office by Congress, for example, or the courts is unconstitutional. Presidents since George Washington had accepted congressional oversight of the government. Republicans were setting up the idea that a president could act alone. Meanwhile, Republicans also turned their attention to the courts. Since the 1950s, The Supreme Court had used the 14th Amendment to apply the first 10 amendments to the Constitution to the state governments, outlawing racial discrimination, laws prohibiting married couples from buying birth control, and in 1973, laws prohibiting abortions in the first trimester of a pregnancy. Opponents of these decisions insisted that the court was engaging in judicial activism, taking away from voters in the states the right to make their own decisions about how society should work. They said that justices were legislating from the bench and insisted that the national government can do nothing that is not explicitly written in the 1787 Constitution. This would mean it cannot regulate business, provide a social safety net, promote infrastructure, or protect civil rights, all hallmarks of the liberal consensus. Reagan's Attorney General, Edwin Meese, said he planned to institutionalize the Reagan Revolution so it can't be set aside no matter what happens in future presidential elections, and began to examine candidates for judgeship for their ideological purity. In 1986, Reagan nominated Antonin Scalia, the intellectual leader of these originalists, for the Supreme Court, and the following year he signaled his determination to overturn the liberal consensus when he nominated to the Supreme Court extremist Robert Bork. Bork had called the ban on whites-only lunch counters, quote, unsurpassed ugliness. Massachusetts Senator Ted Kennedy, a Democrat, warned that, quote, Robert Bork's America is a land in which women would be forced into back-alley abortions. Blacks would sit at segregated lunch counters. Rogue police could break down citizens' doors in midnight raids. School children could not be taught about evolution. Writers and artists could be censored at the whim of the government. And the doors of the federal courts would be shut on the fingers of millions of citizens for whom the judiciary is, and is often the only, protector of the individual rights that are at the heart of our democracy. Bork was so extreme that 6 Republicans joined Democrats in rejecting his appointment to the Supreme Court, but the Republican push to stack the courts was underway. Reagan's team advanced their flirtation with authoritarianism through foreign affairs. The 1947 National Security Act brought together the U.S. Army, Navy, and Air Force under the Department of Defense and established the National Security Council to advise the President on national security and foreign policy. The NSC included the President, Vice President, Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Energy, the Attorney General, the President's Chief of Staff, the Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and other senior advisors. It centered foreign policy in the White House and made much of it secret. Nixon's advisors had taken advantage of this secrecy in their support for Pinochet in Chile, as well as their actions in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. They had also insisted that supporting America in the world required supporting the president. In 1985, Reagan launched his own experiment in promoting American freedom overseas. 6 years before, the Socialist Sandinista National Liberation Front won control of the Nicaraguan government. Afraid that communism would spread across Latin America, and seeing the struggle as a proxy battleground in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, Congress began to fund the Contras, an opposition group. Quickly, though, congressional Democrats came to oppose U.S. meddling in another country's political system and noted that the Contras, whom Reagan called the moral equal of our founding fathers, were no prizes. Their tactics included kidnapping, rape, arson, and murder. In 1985, Congress prohibited any further aid to the Contras. But members of Reagan's National Security Council ignored the new law. Using a plan concocted by Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, an evangelical military aide to National Security Council advisor John Poindexter, the administration illegally sold arms to Iran and funneled the profits to the Contras. When the story of the Iran-Contra affair broke in November 1986, government officials were unrepentant. They continued to break the law, shredding documents that Congress had subpoenaed. Democrats condemned the administration's, quote, secrecy, deception, and disdain for the law, but to many Republicans, North was the face of what America should be, a strong, moral man taking military action to spread American freedom over the objections of socialist sympathizing Democrats. Rather than condemning North, they questioned the patriotism of the investigating committee's chair, Senator Daniel Inouye, who had lost his right arm in World War II fighting in a Nassau combat unit. 14 administration officials were indicted and 11 convicted in the Iran-Contra affair, but on the advice of his Attorney General, William Barr, George H.W. Bush, himself implicated in the scandal, pardoned them before he left office in 1992. Lawrence Walsh, the independent prosecutor in the case, worried that the pardons weakened American democracy. They, quote, undermine the principle that no man is above the law, he said. Quote, it demonstrates that powerful people with powerful allies can commit serious crimes in high office, deliberately abusing the public trust without consequences. Wow. And that is the conclusion of chapter 8. That is 1992. That is 32 years ago. And here we are again. Wow. I'm just going to take a little smoke drink break for a second, and I'll be back. I'll turn up the little crickets. That's true. I think isn't there fancy restaurants where they have like smoke is actually the menu item. Like there's an actual they lift something like a dome or a little cup. And when they lift the cup, you're supposed to ingest the smoke, right? I don't think you should drink smoke, no. That doesn't sound very good. That's like, well, I mean, that's like drinking smoke. I don't think you do that. Doesn't seem like a great idea. But yeah, the drinking smoke, well, that, yeah. Or, yeah, smoking. Well, wait, yeah, that. Well, okay, maybe not. I don't think I have. I don't think I've never eaten smoke or drank smoke. I'm just trying to think to what a fancy place might do. I think I've seen that, but I can't tell you where. So maybe not. Well, nonetheless, mine are separate, but lovely. Absolutely lovely. Absolutely lovely. I hope everyone had a wonderful day. I don't even know I guess, no, I made a lot of phone calls today. A molecular gastrology artist. Yes, yes, thank you. Yes. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not an expert on fancy foods. I can definitely not afford molecular gastrologists. Prefix. Wait, is that what it is? Prefix menu. I'll have the smoke. I'll take my smoke to drink, please. Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop. Look at the shooting star. Look at the shooting star. Look at it. Oh my goodness. I need to move. I need to move to the country. I really do. I need to move to the country. Just a little bit out. I don't need to be crazy isolated. I don't want to be isolated totally. But I don't need much. I don't think I would really enjoy like a real fancy. I think I went to a fancy restaurant once. Like what was it called? It's the one in New York. Oh shit. It's at the Modern. The Modern. That was kind of like that, where they have the really tiny dishes and you do have to kind of act serious. I mean, it was good. Don't get me wrong. Whatever I ate, it was good, but it's just someone else paid for it. I didn't pay for it. But it wasn't very, like, fun. So you had to be, like, serious. I don't know why you have to be serious eating food in a restaurant. Doesn't make any sense. Anyway, sorry. I'm a little distracted. Let's continue with the book. Let's continue with the book. Oh, and also, uh, a suggestion was made that we get our hands on when it comes out, the closed door transcript from today, where they interviewed Hunter Biden, the House Oversight Committee. So I can't wait to get my hands on that transcript, and then we'll take a little look-see at it. Seems like it might be a good one. So on the lookout for that. And I do check Eastman every day. I checked today. There's no new news on Eastman yet. So I'm watching. All right, let's continue. Here we go. Chapter 9. A New Global Project. On December 25th, 1991, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev resigned, marking the end of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The fall of the USSR meant the end of the Cold War, and those Americans who had come to define the world as a fight between the dark forces of communism and the good forces of capitalism believed their ideology of radical individualism had triumphed. I'll just stop there for a moment. I'll be honest with you, this book is kind of helping me understand things I grew up experiencing, but didn't always totally understand the context. And it's embarrassing for me to be this old and admit that, but I'm just really grateful for the high level nature of this book, because for me it's just helping tie together so many historical events that I didn't necessarily have tied together in my head. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. I find this so helpful. I'm very grateful to all of you who encouraged this behavior. All right, here we go. Da, 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 da. With the USSR vanquished, they set out to destroy what they saw as socialist ideology at home. The breakup of the Soviet Union gave political operatives and the politicians in the United States for whom they worked a new crucial tool to undermine American democracy: money, and lots of it, from international authoritarians, especially those from Russia and other former republics of the USSR. Republican politicians and foreign authoritarians began to make alliances over money, influence, and plots to gain power. Since the 1980s, authoritarian governments had figured out they could score U.S. foreign aid by claiming they were standing against communists. Political consultants Charles Black, Paul Manafort, and Roger Stone, who had come together in 1980 to work on Ronald Reagan's campaign, racked up clients by touting their connections to the Reagan and Bush administrations. They represented so many authoritarian governments in Nigeria, Kenya, Zaire, Equatorial Guinea, Saudi Arabia, and Somalia, among others, that a 1992 report from the Center for Public Integrity called their firm the Torturers' Lobby. They brought under one roof lobbying and political consulting, as well as public relations. Bundling these functions was groundbreaking. They would get their clients elected and then help other clients lobby them. As oligarchs began to take over former Soviet republics, the ties between oligarchical methods and the American political system grew. Oligarchs looked to park illicit money in Western democracies where the rule of law would protect their investments, and they favored the Republicans who championed their hierarchical view of the world. For their part, Republican politicians focused on spreading capitalism rather than democracy, arguing that the two went hand in hand. At home, Republicans set out to vanquish the liberal consensus once and for all. As anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist wrote in the Wall Street Journal, quote, "For 40 years conservatives fought a two-front battle against statism, against the Soviet Empire abroad and the American left at home. Now the Soviet Union is gone and conservatives can redeploy, and this time the other team doesn't have nuclear weapons." In the 1990s, movement conservatives turned their firepower on those they considered insufficiently committed to free enterprise, including traditional Republicans who agreed with Democrats that the government should regulate the economy, provide a basic social safety net, promote infrastructure, and protect civil rights. Their first public victim was President George H.W. Bush, who had come to office from the traditional wing of the party and set out during his presidency to repair the holes cut in the country's fabric by Reagan's supply-side economics. Bush was willing to raise taxes to address the $2.1 trillion debt Reagan had run up in his 8 years in office. These tax hikes drew the fury of movement conservatives who called him and other traditional Republicans Republicans in name only, or rhinos, who were helping to bring socialism to America. Republican lawmakers moved further right, and those openly supporting the liberal consensus disappeared from party leadership. Their primary target, though, was Democrats, who had frustrated movement conservatives once again in 1992 by putting former Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton into the White House. James Johnson, who was from Arkansas and had stood fervently against the integration of Little Rock's Central High School in 1957, called Clinton a, quote, queer-mongering, whore-hopping adulterer, a baby-killing, draft-dodging, dope-tolerating, lying, two-faced, treasonous activist. Surely such a man was not a legitimate president. In 1996, the Fox News Channel debuted on cable television, joining right-wing radio talk show hosts to feed the idea that their political opponents were socialists trying to destroy the country. Clinton frustrated right-wing ideologues not just with his domestic positions, but also because they thought he did not push American ideology hard enough overseas in the wake of the Cold War. In 1997, political commentator William Kristol and scholar Robert Kagan brought together Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and other neoconservatives or neocons to insist that the United States should significantly increase defense spending and lead the world. Hi, Michael. How are you? Key to their project for the new American century was the removal of Iraq's President Saddam Hussein from power because they believed he was destabilizing the Middle East. Iraq had allied with the USSR during the Cold War, and when in 1990 it invaded its smaller neighbor Kuwait, UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher had convinced President H.W. Bush to bring together an international coalition of 39 countries to impose sanctions on Iraq and to stop Saddam from occupying and absorbing Kuwait. Acting under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, which permits, quote, collective self-defense, they did so. But after accomplishing that goal, they honored the charter and declined to topple Saddam. To the neocons' chagrin, the next president didn't seem to get the point either. The U.S. must challenge regimes hostile to our interests and values, they said, and promote the cause of political and economic freedom abroad. Saddam was out of reach until September 11, 2001, when 19 al-Qaeda terrorists, inspired by Saudi exile Osama bin Laden, flew airplanes into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City and the Pentagon outside Washington, D.C., and were on course to hit the U.S. Capitol before that plane's passengers crashed the plane into a Pennsylvania field. Neocons saw the attack as an opportunity to hit Saddam Hussein, although he had not been involved in the attack. 15 of the terrorists were from Saudi Arabia, 2 from the United Arab Emirates, 1 from Lebanon, and 1 from Egypt, and they were operating out of Afghanistan, where the ruling extremist Islamic government, the Taliban, permitted al-Qaeda to have a foothold. President George W. Bush launched rocket attacks on the Taliban government, successfully overthrowing it before the end of the year. And then the administration undertook to reorder the Middle East in America's image. In 2002, it announced the Bush Doctrine, saying that the U.S. would preemptively strike nations suspected of planning attacks on the U.S. Then, in 2003, after setting up a pro-American government in Afghanistan, the administration invaded Iraq. But the Iraq War was not popular at home, and its unpopularity pushed the administration to equate supporting the Republicans with defending the nation against Islamic terrorists. That rhetorical strategy permitted them to strengthen the power of the president over Congress, most dramatically over the issue of, quote, enhanced interrogation techniques, more popularly known as torture, which in 2002 the administration began using against suspected terrorists. Taking a drink, excuse me. Although the U.S. had traditionally considered torture illegal, the administration now argued that any limit to the president's authority to conduct war was unconstitutional. When news of the program broke in 2004, Congress outlawed it, only to have Bush issue a signing statement rejecting any limitation on the unitary executive branch. Meanwhile, the shared ideas and interest among rising global elites began to create a tangled web of money laundering, influence peddling, and anti-democratic plots that festered in foreign governments and infected the United States. In 1996, Paul Manafort managed the Republican National Convention, and by 2003, he and his partner, Richard Davis, were representing pro-Russia Ukrainian oligarch Viktor Yanukovych. In July 2004, U.S. journalist Paul Klebnikov was murdered in Moscow for exposing the Russian government corruption. A year later, Manafort proposed working for Russian President Vladimir Putin's government in former Soviet republics, Europe, and the United States by influencing politics, business dealings, and news coverage. In 2008, Davis was the director of Republican presidential nominee John McCain's campaign, and McCain celebrated his 70th birthday with Davis and Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska on a Russian yacht at anchor in the Balkan country of Montenegro. McCain was well known for promising to stand up to Putin and his running mate Sarah Palin's claim that she could counter the growing power of Russia in part because, quote, they're our next door neighbors, and you can actually see Russia from land here in Alaska, from an island in Alaska, became a long running joke. The comment about seeing Russia from her house came from Saturday Night Live. But observers noted that some of McCain's political advisers were backing the Kremlin's interests, including Russia's extension of control over Montenegro. Steve Schmidt, a campaign advisor who was fiercely loyal to McCain, explained, there were two factions in the campaign, a pro-democracy faction and a pro-Russia faction, led by Davis. Like Manafort, Davis had a residence in New York City's Trump Tower, owned by one of the first clients of Black Manafort and Stone had taken on in 1980, a New York City real estate developer named Donald J. Trump. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize he was a client of theirs from 1980. God, I know nothing. What? How in the world? Okay. Increasingly, Republican politicians seem to be operating on the old hierarchical idea that some people were better than others and should direct the economy, society, and politics, and they maintain that control by advancing a false narrative for their supporters that cast their opponents as enemies of the country. In 2004, having manufactured information meant to justify the invasion of Iraq, the Bush administration was deeply entrenched in that ideology, no matter what the facts showed. A senior advisor to Bush disdainfully told journalist Ron Suskind that people like him, Suskind, were in the, quote, reality-based community. They believed people could find solutions based on their observations and careful study of discernible reality. But, the aide continued, such a worldview was obsolete. Quote, that's not the way the world really works anymore. We are in an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too, and that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do. Wow, that's the end of chapter 9. That was a short one. Let's take a little smoke break. Taking a smoke break. Taking a smoke break. Taking a smoke break. I like the way that sounds. Wait, where's the smoke? Where's the smoke? It's very interesting. It's not a terribly deep dive, I realize that. But it certainly is a good, I would call this a good, well, I would call this a decent overview. Because, and the reason I hold back so far, and maybe I'm probably getting over my skis in many respects. But my observation is that this seems like it could go into more about the Russian Orthodox Church and Christian evangelists here. It doesn't bring up yet the kind of new apostolic reformation, you know, the influence of like hyper white nationalism. But maybe that comes later. Yeah, so I'm not questioning. I'm not questioning. Ooh, oh my God. Okay, I have a very exciting project that I'm working on, but it is a secret. But it will be a an audio project. It will be episodic, and I already have the outline, and I'm actually going to write a script, and I'm going to record it. I sure am. I surely am. I'm going to record it. So get ready because it's coming out probably in May, I think. I think it'll probably be ready by May. Maybe. Yeah. I started writing it tonight. I'm very excited about it. And it's probably going to make some people real mad. But I don't really care. Yeah. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. 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 Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'd like to release it as soon as possible, but I really want to do a good job. For once, I want to actually not try to ad lib like I normally do. So, but more weed. I have. It's so great though. Oh my God. I'm excited. I should have done it earlier. Anyway, sorry. My mind's my mind's going. I think this is really good weed, whatever I have. Pretty sure it's an indica. All right, here we go. Chapter 10. All right, one more little drinky purr. Okie dokes. Here we go. Sorry, little cough. Okay, too much weed. All right, chapter 10. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Hold on, let me turn the thing off. Oh my goodness, good weed. Okay, here we go. Illegitimate democracy. In the 2008 election, Republican presidential candidate John McCain of Arizona tried to present himself as a maverick who rejected the extremes of his party, but his running mate, Sarah Palin, deliberately catered to a rising tide of populism. She accused Democratic presidential candidate Barack Obama of palling around with terrorists, and right-wing media, especially the Fox News channel, ran with the idea. They insisted that Obama, who was born in Hawaii to an American mother and a father of British and Kenyan citizenship, was not an American or born in the U.S. In fact, both his mother's citizenship and his birth in the U.S. made Obama a U.S. citizen, and his campaign provided a copy of his birth certificate. But the suggestion that Obama was not a legitimate president brought together racism, religion, and the Republicans' long-standing argument that Democrats were socialists, the tag they used for anyone who supported the liberal consensus. Although voters handily elected Obama and his vice president, Joe Biden of Delaware, the lie simmered in right-wing media, springing back to life in 2011 when Manafort client Donald Trump, considering entering the presidential race, began getting media coverage by pushing the so-called birther conspiracy. Trump demanded to know why Obama wouldn't show his birth certificate, when in fact he had, and kept the story alive by feeding the media a series of, quote, facts that were, in fact, all false. Echoing the ways in which Republicans had bolstered the voter fraud narrative in the 1990s through investigations, Trump claimed to have hired investigators to find the real story. Republicans treated the biracial president with disdain. In September 2009, Obama addressed a joint session of Congress to discuss his plan for health care reform, a plan that later became the Affordable Care Act. When he stated, accurately, that the measure would not provide health care coverage for undocumented immigrants, South Carolina Representative Joe Wilson shouted, "You lie," in an astonishing breach of decorum that later earned him a reprimand from the House, and that he used to raise money from donors. As soon as Obama took office, Republicans channeled groups of opposition into a movement that reinvented American history. By the end of February 2009, they were calling themselves the Tea Party, after the 1773 event in which Bostonians threw tea into the Boston Harbor to protest their lack of a say in their government. The name had a second meaning as well. Protesters said they were taxed enough already. Leaders urged Tea Party supporters to come together to turn the country back to a mythological past based on what they interpreted to be the principles of the Constitution. Tea Partiers came from a range of Republican groups that worried about socialism, voter fraud, and what they saw as an influx of black and brown people. But they could agree that the Constitution was clear and easily understood, and that it required a strict interpretation of the powers of the federal government. They claimed to want to return the country to the principles of the framers. To spread that idea, Tea Party leaders quite deliberately tried to organize educational efforts, mobilize communities, and get followers to engage politically. In March 2010, Democrats passed the Affordable Care Act, popularly dubbed Obamacare. It was the most significant overhaul of healthcare regulations and the largest expansion of healthcare coverage since Congress enacted Medicare and Medicaid in 1965. It expanded coverage through subsidies so that individuals could afford to buy health insurance in the market. The law went into effect in 2014, and by 2016, the number of uninsured Americans had been cut in half, with 20 million newly covered. It was a Republican president, Theodore Roosevelt, who first proposed universal health care at the beginning of the 20th century. Republican President Dwight Eisenhower then tried to muscle such a program into being with the help of the new department created under him, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. In the early 1970s, President Richard Nixon, another Republican, had proposed a significant expansion of national health care, but it failed to win enough support. And when Health, Education, and Welfare became the Department of Health and Human Services in 1979, its declared mission was one of, quote, improving the health, safety, and well-being of America. Despite this history, right-wing media insisted that this expansion was socialism, pure and simple, and demanded the Democrats focus on the national debt, which was rising fast thanks to former President George W. Bush's unfunded military engagement in Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as his dramatic expansion of Medicare drug benefits, which by 2008 cost $49.3 billion a year. Obamacare is a pure income redistribution play, wrote Fox News Channel personality Bill O'Reilly. Income redistribution is a hallmark of socialism, and we, in America, are now moving in that direction. Obamacare, he claimed, was about capitalism versus socialism. Republicans opposed socialism, O'Reilly said, but Republicans Republicans have not been able to convince the majority of Americans that income redistribution is harmful. There was another solution to that dilemma, though: flooding the zone with propaganda. In January 2010, the Supreme Court, under Chief Justice John Roberts, whose professional career had been spent opposing the 1965 Voting Rights Act, handed down the Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission decision. It ruled that corporations could spend unlimited money in campaign advertising, so long as they were not formally working with a candidate or a party. Corporations and billionaires promptly formed super PACs, political action committees that were allowed to take funds from dark money groups, nonprofits that do not have to disclose their donors. In 2006, dark money made up less than $5 million of spending in federal elections. 6 years later, by 2012, it was more than $300 million. Because dark money groups did not have to disclose their donors, it was not clear where that money was coming from. By January 2011, then FBI Director Robert S. Mueller had become concerned that globalization and modern technology had changed the nature of organized crime. It had become international, fluid, and sophisticated, with multi-billion-dollar stakes. Its operators did not care about ideology, they cared about money, and they were cross-pollinating across countries, religious affiliations, and political parties, sharing only their greed. Mueller warned that these criminals may infiltrate our businesses, they may provide logistical support to hostile foreign powers, they may try to manipulate those at the highest levels of government. Indeed, these so-called iron triangles of organized criminals, corrupt government officials, and business leaders pose a significant national security threat. Obama's Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, was also concerned about the rise of international oligarchy. In 2011, she took a stand against Russian President Vladimir Putin's manipulation of that country's parliamentary elections. The Russian people, like people everywhere, deserve the right to have their voices heard and their votes counted, Clinton said, and that means they deserve free, fair, and transparent elections and leaders who are accountable to them. Elections in America were also becoming less free and fair. In 2010, Republican operatives launched Operation Red Map, which stood for Redistricting Majority Project, a plan to take control of state houses across the country, so that Republicans would control the redistricting maps and put in place after the 2010 census. Through the process of what is called gerrymandering, after Elbridge Gerry, an early governor of Massachusetts, who signed off on such a scheme even though he didn't like it, political parties could gain control of extra seats in a state by drawing districts to either pack or crack their opponents. Packing means stuffing the opposition party voters into districts so their votes are not distributed more widely. Cracking means dividing opponents' voters into multiple districts so that there are too few of them in any district to have a chance of winning. Parties have always engaged in such machinations, but new technologies enabled Republicans to shift into overdrive, hoping to hamstring Obama's ability to accomplish anything by making sure he had a hostile Congress. Party operatives raised money from corporate donors to swamp state elections with ads and campaign literature. The plan worked. After the 2010 election, Republicans controlled the legislatures in key states of Florida, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Ohio, and Michigan, as well as other smaller states, and they redrew congressional maps using precise computer models. They had essentially hobbled representative democracy. In the 2012 election, Democrats won the White House decisively, the Senate easily, and a majority of 1.4 million votes for House candidates. And yet, Republicans came away with a 33-seat majority in the House of Representatives. So I'll stop there for a moment because I remember us watching in the lounge in Discord People You May Know, which was a documentary about Charles Krieg and his work to uncover the data mining of different bad actors in our world most notably Peter Thiel and the people behind like Cambridge Analytica. And in that system and through GLOO, GLOO, which is I believe a Peter Thiel program, where they were getting very detailed demographic data and household data by and matching that data with um, different data points scraped from social media accounts, and then targeting those households with invitation into local church communities that were then controlled and could be controlled through messaging and programming and different marketing support from these organizations. I can't remember the name of the organization. The one organization that was really doing a lot of like Council of Churches or something, Ko-Fi, something like that. So apologies, but the documentary People You May Know, it feels very relevant in this section. Republican Mitch McConnell of Kentucky had become Senate Minority Leader in 2007, the year before Obama's election. He recognized that the best way to destroy Americans' faith in the federal government and return Republicans to power was to make sure the Democrats couldn't accomplish anything while Obama was in office. On the night of Obama's inauguration, Republican leaders, including incoming House Minority Whip Eric Cantor, Deputy Whip Kevin McCarthy, and former Speaker Newt Gingrich, agreed over dinner to oppose anything that the new president proposed, regardless of whether they agreed with it. Quote, "For the next 2 years, we can't let you succeed in anything. That's our ticket to coming back," Republican senators told incoming Vice President Joe Biden. In October 2010, McConnell told a reporter that, quote, "the single most important thing we want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president." McConnell also deployed the Senate filibuster as a weapon. To pass an agreement to make senators stop talking and take a vote requires 60 votes, a rule that had previously been rarely used. By simply threatening a filibuster, Republicans could kill popular legislation, even a gun safety law for background checks, before gun purchases that had been introduced after the massacre of 26 people, including 20 small children, at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Although 90% of Americans supported the bill, 45 senators, representing just 38% of the American people, killed it. Republicans made it an article of faith that their opponents could win an election only by leveraging the votes of illegitimate voters. So they were prepared to act when, in 2013, the Roberts Supreme Court handed down the Shelby County v. Holder decision, which gutted the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The decision declared unconstitutional the rule that states could not change voting laws without pre-clearance from the Department of Justice. Republican state officials immediately began to introduce voter ID laws and bills restricting voter registration, provisions that disproportionately affected minorities. When Republicans took control of the Senate in 2014, McConnell became Senate Majority Leader, in position to cement the power of the Republicans through the courts. This strategy had begun in the Reagan administration, when the Attorney General had deliberately politicized the Department of Justice. Reagan also appointed 3 Supreme Court justices and 1 Chief Justice, and the rightward swing of the court continued thanks to George W. Bush, who appointed 2 Supreme Court justices, including a Chief Justice. To stop Obama from changing this trend, McConnell held up the president's judicial appointments to lower courts and finally took the unprecedented step of refusing even to consider his moderate nominee to fill a seat on the Supreme Court. Finally, Republicans illustrated their refusal to accept democratic governance with a dramatic rejection of the traditional U.S. principle established in 1799 when Congress passed the Logan Act, prohibiting private citizens from negotiating with foreign powers. That partisanship stops at the water's edge. In 2015, 47 lawmakers, including quite senior senators, signed a letter written by freshman extremist Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton,
warning Iranian officials that they would overturn any agreement Iran made with the Obama administration as soon as they could, presumably after the 2016 election. With Republican voters convinced that Democrats were deadly dangerous and Republican lawmakers having skewed the electoral system in their favor. Oops, wait a minute, let me make sure. Oh, that is the sentence. And Republican lawmakers having skewed the electoral system in their favor, the country seemed securely in Republican hands. In 2012, Republican strategist Grover Norquist had said triumphantly, "We don't need a president to tell us in what direction to go. We know what direction to go. We just need a president to sign this stuff. Pick a Republican with enough working digits to handle a pen to become president of the United States." But voters in that year chose Obama and Biden again. And so, in 2016, the Republicans would ride the themes of the past 40 years to their logical conclusion. And that is the end of chapter 10, and we're about to enter more modern day, part 2 of the book, The Authoritarian Experiment. I'm going to save that beginning with chapter 11, perhaps tomorrow, probably tomorrow. I think we can safely do that. I am very much enjoying the way she writes. I will say that. She's got a very straightforward manner of writing, so I appreciate that. I get a little tongue-tied though. I get misty. I felt like that went very fast. I missed everyone. That was fun. I'm having a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun with the reading, and it was really fun to get out with Democracy Dino. Now I've got to kind of figure out a way to keep track of what's happening down there at the courthouse and other places. There's a lot of viable alternatives out here that seem relevant. And now that we have some delays on trial dates starting, makes good sense to get out and amplify some messages, huh? Get out there and amplify those messages. I was watching, what was it? I think it was a short. I think it was a short on YouTube, and it was Lucille Ball. I don't know what year it was, but she was getting the Kennedy Center honor. And some actor was reading a message that her husband, Desi, had written for the occasion. because he died 5 days before it happened at the Kennedy Center. He didn't die at the Kennedy Center, but he died. And it was just, it was incredibly sweet. I think they had a very challenging relationship by most accounts. But he said in the letter, he talked a lot about, the show was Lucy, and you know, it wouldn't have. It was 90% her and 10% the rest of us. All that stuff, which was sweet. But then he said, I Love Lucy was not just a title. And, of course, it was just a very moving moment. And I remember after my mom died, my parents got divorced about, let's see, about 10 years before she died. Maybe a little more, maybe 14. And, they kind of, it was a pretty acrimonious divorce. My father cheated on my mom. And so, I actually didn't talk to my father for about 5 years after that. And then through means that don't really matter, I mean, I don't even remember. I just decided that I wasn't gonna hold on to the anger anymore. So I reconnected with him. And then when she passed, um, he was traveling he traveled around. He kind of bummed around after they got divorced, like over like Costa Rica and Ireland and Germany, and he just spent time in different places, mostly with women, but that was fine. That was his deal. It's a bit of a Lothario. Um, so a few years after my mom died, she wanted to be cremated and interred with her parents in Texas. So a lot of us and my dad went down to San Antonio to, you know, bury the ashes, inter, I guess, in the family, whatever plot for her family. And I remember my father standing over her headstone, and he called her Babe. He always called her Babe. He said, I always loved you, Babe. And that was the first time I had ever heard my father tell my mother that he loved her. So that reminded me of that when I saw the Lucille Ball thing, and I thought, wow, it's really amazing how smallest expressions can have such an incredible impact on people. And I think it was because I think that's one of the things my father kind of taught or instilled, or no, because I don't think he tried, but it was the power of knowing the sincerity of those words there was just this incredible power in that moment. And it was okay, you know, that she wasn't there to hear it somehow. So I thought that was an interesting, poignant moment of reflection today. Hmm, it's pretty good. And, I think on that bigger kind of philosophical level, which is whatever, you know, I think it just means, I think that's one of the things that I take away is that it really does matter. Things that seem small do matter. And when you give that to someone, when you share that, like I feel like that's part of why we're here is to share those when they're sincere moments, to really appreciate that for what it is, I guess. Right? Anyway, I'm rambling. But that's what I was thinking about today is that that's kind of what the point is, if there is a point, is if you can, from a sincere place, not not a not a manufactured place, but it's important to appreciate those moments from people. And I really appreciated that moment from my dad. And I'm sure, and I felt the appreciation of that moment for Lucille Ball. Because maybe she really needed to hear that from him. I know my mom really needed to hear that from my dad. And I feel like in some way she did. But, that's what you do when that's part of the grief. No. Anyway, interesting observation. Oh, I love you, Michael. My bud, my brother, my buddy. So yeah, it was good. It's not sad. I'm not sad at all. It's good. This is the life stuff, right? Like this is the good part. I used to always say that to my daughter when, things were like maybe she had a little crush or she, whatever. I said, this is the good part. This is the part you hold on to. This is the part that makes that great feeling. So you don't ever want to take that for granted. I don't think. I mean, we do, right? I do. Sure, I don't walk around being super grateful all the time, but I am generally. Same old up and downs of everyone else. I think I need a hot tea, is what I think I need for my throat. Probably too much screaming at Supreme Court today. What did I do today? I don't even know what I did. Oh, I know what I did today. I resolved a lot of phone calls. That's why my voice is so not great. All right, my loves, it's time for everyone to go to bed. What is it? What is it he says? Samuel L. Jackson, he says, go the fuck to sleep. But you don't have to go to sleep. I'm not your mother, for sure. But enjoy your night. Have the sweetest dreams. Think about sleeping in a tent in this beautiful jungle. And the fantasy part of it is there's no bugs. No bugs. Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. I love you too, sir. I sure do. All right, my loves. Well, thank you so much for coming. I will see you tomorrow in the morning ish, and then we'll go from there. All right.